Picture this, a friend whose default setting is a resounding yes, even when every fiber of her being is screaming for a no. Watching her wrestle with those seemingly innocent requests sent chills down my spine. One afternoon, we stood outside our favorite cafe, her phone buzzing incessantly. I could see the internal struggle dance across her face as another "can you help me?" popped up. She hesitated, then relented with a soft, tortured whisper, "I don't want to, but I will." That phrase left a mark on me, revealing a reality that many know all too well. Hey everyone, welcome to Psychologist Jeep, the quiet corner of the internet for overthinkers, silent observers, and people who say yes even when every cell in their body is screaming no. If you're the one who carries everyone else's comfort while quietly ignoring your own, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a second to like this video, share it with someone who always puts others first, and leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. It's grounding to know how far this shared experience travels. Today, we're unpacking the psychology of people who can't say no, not because they're weak, but because they were taught that love is earned through compliance, peace is kept through silence, and conflict feels dangerous. We'll explore how this pattern forms, why it feels so hard to break, and why exhaustion often hides behind a polite smile. This isn't just about being a nice person. Nope, it dips much deeper into the psychological undercurrents that keep some folks chained to a perpetual yes. There's a fear simmering just beneath the surface, a dread that weighs heavily on their hearts like lead. They're constantly walking a tightrope between maintaining their own peace and the wild uncertainty of disappointing someone. This isn't a simple trait. It's a survival mechanism, a coping strategy born out of years of conditioning and emotional gymnastics. So when did this pattern kick off? Spoiler alert, way back in childhood. Approval felt like a warm, fuzzy blanket, while disapproval sometimes felt like a snowstorm of loneliness. Little did they know they were being wired for compliance in their formative years. Each time they convinced themselves that being agreeable would sidestep conflict or disappointment, they inadvertently twisted the very fabric of their self-worth. Fast forward to adulthood, and that conditioning is stealthy. It creeps up in ways that are subtler yet just as invasive. Fast forward to now, and this inability to refuse manifests in peculiar ways. Ever noticed how some people are glued to their phones, responding within nanoseconds, even when their eyelids are drooping? They blast out apologies for transgressions that aren't remotely theirs to own, as if their existence alone could be a burden. Their needs get shelved, all because they dread being labeled as demanding or, gasp, ungrateful. Their comforting internal motto, "Your expectations trump my peace." What many fail to realize is that this relentless pressure isn't loud or brash. It's more of a sneaky obligation that lurks in the background of everyday interactions. These champions of compromise often turn into emotional buffers, deflecting conflict to keep the peace. Despite their serene exteriors exuding calmness and reliability, they're like swans gliding gracefully across a lake, paddling frantically beneath the surface. Let's dive into the twisted logic that keeps this cycle going. Empathy, that marvelous yet burdensome trait, can become both a superpower and a crutch. The individuals caught in the yes trap feel emotions acutely. They'll pick up on the subtlest shift in someone's tone or mood. Their minds run marathons, racing through the possibilities of how a refusal might land, often imagining disasters where none exist. That's not weakness. It's their brain's wiring, scanning the environment for harmony like a radar. As they navigate life's complex dance, it becomes increasingly clear. This life of perpetual agreement can lead to an unseen burden. The underlying truth? These compassionate souls carry an emotional weight, feeling that earning their place requires constant compliance. Perhaps we can all take a lesson from this saga, recognizing the strength in saying no and the beauty in honoring our own needs amidst the chaos of helping others. When someone's knack for sensing others eclipses their ability to tune into themselves, a slow drift towards self-neglect begins. It's insidious, like a ninja slipping through the door without making a noise, one agreeable yes at a time. Friends who never miss a chance to help, even when they're running on fumes, relationships weighed down by emotional baggage, and work commitments piled high. All these tiny sacrifices accumulate, reshaping a person's life into a series of "I suppose I should." Many of these yes people grow up thinking they must earn their place in the hearts of others. They believe love is conditional and compliance is their ticket to being cherished or, worse, preventing emotional fallout. Even as adults, those childhood lessons linger like a catchy tune stuck in your head. Their reactions may not spring from conscious thought. They're running on the autopilot activated by old fears kicking in. It's ironic how a protective mechanism can morph into a self-imposed prison. Unpacking this realization can feel like lifting an emotional gym weight you didn't even want to carry. It's heavy. This tendency to agree isn't just annoying. It's rooted deep in the psyche. Those moments of discomfort and the ability to say no remain hidden layers that are slowly uncovered one yes at a time. It's part of the invisible contract they sign in their minds, even if they never asked for it in the first place. They've played the role of the comfort-giving friend or partner for so long, they forget there's an option to do otherwise. Now let's not gloss over the underlying fear that creeps in. What if saying no rips the seams of their carefully stitched social fabric? The fear of conflict or disappointment echoes through their minds, making them feel like emotional jugglers trying to keep everything afloat. The world often overlooks this quiet struggle, missing the subtle signs of reluctance. After all, who notices the slight pause before an enthusiastic yes? Only those worn by the burdens of expectation can recognize that internal dialogue occurs just milliseconds before a response. The fear of losing one's identity plays a sneaky role here. For many, reliability is the cornerstone of their self-esteem. They think saying no might alter others' perceptions of them. Yikes. Refusing a request feels like dismantling the very foundation of worth they've built their lives around. The psychological concept of tuning into others' expectations is real and relentless. It encourages people to mirror rather than define themselves. Over time, this automatic drive to say yes creates an ironic sense of isolation. You can be amidst friends yet feel like you're alone on a desert island without a paddle. Years spent chasing others' desires can numb your own preferences. You lose the connection to what sparks joy or even mild interest in your own life. When you finally get a moment to ask, "What do I really want?" you're met with a cloud of uncertainty, as if you've forgotten the voice that used to speak up for you. As a result, people who can't say no often find their identities tangled in the web of others' expectations. The amicable facade comes with a hefty price tag, losing touch with their true selves. They need to tune in and rediscover their authentic voice amidst the cacophony of yes. I'll do it. Sure. Why not? And of course, I'll help. Small steps toward embracing their own needs can lead to a life that's not just about pleasing others, but actually embodies their own desires. Just imagine what could unfold if they finally learned to put themselves first and say no without guilt. Living in two worlds can be a real juggling act for those who struggle to say no. On the outside, they proudly parade as the kind-hearted heroes, always ready to lend a hand or say yes to every request. Meanwhile, they silently wrestle with a growing sense of weariness as they carry the weight of their own needs, which often end up lost in the chaos. The result? A cocktail of exhaustion stirred with a dash of guilt, shaken but never served. These agreeable souls tell themselves that one more request won't hurt, that they'll finally draw the line after this favor. But like a cat to a laser pointer, they just keep chasing the next yes. It's not that they yearn for the approval. It's the fear of saying no that looms larger than the emotional cost of acquiescing. Their imaginations run wild, constructing elaborate scenes of disappointment and confusion that rarely play out in real life. Yet the mind clings to those worst-case scenarios like a toddler clutching their favorite stuffed animal. The truth is, those who can't say no are often protégés of empathy, but this isn't the villain of the tale. It's merely a complicated sidekick. They dread the emotional fallout from setting boundaries, tiptoeing around friends' expectations in a desperate attempt to avoid any turbulence. But ironically, each hidden not only stirs up internal chaos, leaving them feeling like a marionette whose strings are being pulled in every direction, away from personal truths. It's not about blame. It's about recognizing a common human struggle. Each hesitant yes has a backstory, a tale of sacrifice disguised as stability. Maybe they learned early on that keeping things easy and agreeable was the ticket to being lovable, the answer to avoid conflict. But in this noble quest for harmony, they often overlook their own authenticity, stepping over their boundaries like a doormat welcoming muddy shoes. Now let's get real for a second. If you're someone who finds it hard to say no, it doesn't mean you're a pushover. Nope, you're likely one of the most emotionally astute folks in the room. You pick up on subtleties that others miss, effectively playing the role of the emotional thermometer. Your empathy runs deep, but sometimes it leaked out so much for others that you forgot to care for yourself. The irony. Years of deprioritizing your own needs morph into a complex relationship with your boundaries. They aren't non-existent. They've just been relegated to the back seat for way too long. It's easy to feel like a prisoner to those patterns, tracing the same old paths of self-neglect until you realize that they just don't hold the same charm anymore. The routine gives way to a quiet rebellion inside you, a restless awareness that something's gotta give. And indeed, that moment comes when the cost of always being the agreeable one becomes glaringly apparent. It's not a flash of enlightenment. It's more like the steady retreat of an ocean against the shore, one wave at a time. As your emotional tides recede, you're left to confront the sandy truths of fatigue and unexpressed desires, realizing that true balance comes from honoring both your needs and those of others. They woke up one morning feeling an unusual fatigue that no amount of sleep could mend. But this wasn't your run-of-the-mill physical exhaustion. It was the emotional kind, the type that creeps in like a ninja in the night. This weariness came from a relentless cycle of self-neglect cultivated through countless minor compromises. Those little moments when they shrugged off their own boundaries to make someone else feel cozy. A spark of energy? Not today. It's an odd revelation when the 100 tiny things you brushed off collide to rain on your parade. Each tiny yes adds to an unseen burden, creating an emotional quilt that envelopes them too tightly. Intuitively, they grapple with the sense of disconnection. Simple tasks now feel like they're carrying around a mini elephant on their shoulders, and even in a crowded room, they feel like a lone island. The relentless habit of people-pleasing snuck up on them, wrapped around their identity like a boa constrictor. What's even funnier yet painfully so is that they find themselves in relationships that are beautifully lopsided. Like a wobbly table, everything is askew, with them always as the dependable one. The person who waves the flag of I'll take care of that. But, just like fashion trends, such a role can become both comforting and suffocating. It's a weird dichotomy where comfort and struggle tango together until you can't dance anymore or don't even know the steps. And then comes a moment, a singer in a choir of desires, asking what they want. Cue the crickets chirping. What? Their wants, buried like a time capsule, feel so distant and far removed, like trying to find Wi-Fi on a deserted island. It's not that they don't have desires. They just packed them away in a suitcase labeled "Do Not Open" long ago. Somehow, the art of self-care was replaced by a degree in self-neglect, and introspection became a forbidden fruit. Every time they attempt to utter a no, an overwhelming rush of guilt hits like a freight train. It's bizarre. Really a cocktail of emotions blended together where guilt plays the lead role. Even if their reasoning is solid, like trying to put out a fire with gasoline, the guilt creeps in, convincing them they're a disappointment. Why? Because somewhere along the way, they mistook being agreeable for being genuinely wanted. In their mind, they were both the hero and the hostaged prince. It turns out, this emotional clutter doesn't fade with age. It becomes an unwelcome roommate that overstays its welcome. The weight of past responsibility lingers like the scent of burnt popcorn long after the bag has been removed. They constantly replay scenarios in their heads, reliving days where not making someone upset was their superpower. Now that cape feel heavier than ever. Good luck shaking off those childhood tapes. There lies a curious loneliness in being the rock everybody leans on. People think of you as a superhero, flying in every time with a rescue mission. But just as everyone takes a sip of reliance, they often forget to ask how you are doing. Thanks roll in for your help, yet nobody checks the emotional bill for it. All the while, you stay silent, caught in the unspoken pact to carry everyone's burdens while silently wishing someone would ask about yours. But no matter the strength, even superheroes have limits. Eventually, the facade shatters, and the invisible weight manifests as a cocktail of irritation and emotional fatigue. The resentment sneaks in, often startling them with its existence. That quiet feeling of being overlooked emerges, nudging them to realize that the tiresome charade isn't sustainable. It's time to reclaim their identity and reshape how they're seen, to step away from the shadows and shine a little light on their own needs. People who struggle to say no often find themselves feeling like ghosts in their own lives. It's not that others don't care. It's just that they never let anyone in long enough to truly notice them. They deceive themselves into thinking that jumping into every request is no big deal. "I'm just being helpful," they chant, while their inner selves scream about the emotional toll. Resentment starts to build, not aimed at others, but at their own inability to set boundaries. This inner turmoil is a silent cyclone, gradually gathering strength as they ignore their true feelings. Over time, that little voice, which once waged war for attention, softens yet never silences. It lurks in moments of stillness, prodding with relentless questions. When will you put yourself first? And why are you shrinking to fit where you don't belong? It's a wake-up call that grows persistently louder, demanding acknowledgement. Learning to say no might seem like turning into a cold-hearted villain, but not quite. It's more about cultivating the courage to exist fearlessly. Understanding that your needs are crucial just like everyone else's is empowering. Guarding your energy isn't just self-preservation. It's emotionally sane. Saying no isn't the same as declaring war. It's an intelligent approach to clarity and mutual respect. However, the fear of saying no can be a tapestry woven from childhood experiences. Those raised in unpredictable emotional climates often become chameleons, adapting to ensure approval. Love seemed conditional, and loyalty wore a mask labeled obligatory. As adults, they carry this baggage, unwittingly chained to patterns that keep them from thriving. The brain, after all, holds on to strategies that once provided safety even if they start feeling like shackles. Ironically, people crave authenticity, not just compliant puppets. The ones who lasso all their control into agreeability may become emotionally unreliable. Relationships suffer because when yes is the only song they sing, others start doubting its sincerity. The beauty of saying no is that it restores balance, setting clear expectations that helps everyone navigate the relationship waters more smoothly. Imagine the sheer liberating thrill when someone finally utters that elusive no for the first time. Feels foreign, the air thick with tension. Anxiety dances in their chest, and their mind runs a marathon. But when the moment passes, a lightness often follows. The world doesn't shatter, and relationships withstand the minor quake. All of a sudden, they realize fear has always been a louder beast than reality itself. With each successive no, they rediscover themselves piece by piece, like sand eroding away to reveal a vibrant rock beneath. It's gradual, like a sunrise rather than a lightning bolt. With every act of self-assertion, they reclaim their presence amid the chaos, stitching back together the threads of their identity that had been carelessly frayed. Finally, there's an exhilarating sensation of becoming who they were always meant to be. As time passes, people start to notice a delightful shift in their sense of identity. It's like waking up from a long slumber. They begin to discern what they genuinely crave as they untangle their true desires from the never-ending list of obligations. These revelatory moments are akin to piecing together a jigsaw puzzle, reclaiming those lost fragments of themselves that were buried under heaps of yes. It's not about being selfish. It's about healing and evolving into an emotionally intact person. For those who've struggled with saying no, there often exists a deep well of empathy for others, but tragically, this generosity doesn't extend to themselves. Discovering how to say no isn't simply an act of defiance. It's a gentle restoration of balance. This newfound quiet strength isn't loud or aggressive. It's steady and nurturing, grounded in the awareness of personal limits and the recognition that emotional energy isn't limitless. The transformation begins to spill into relationships, morphing them into more genuine interactions. As boundaries are honored, people find themselves with a renewed presence and a drastically reduced sense of resentment. They're no longer abandoning themselves, and others start recognizing the value of their time and presence. Suddenly, the invisible person becomes respected, not diminished. Saying no becomes less about alienation and more about clarity. It filters out those who genuinely care from those who simply take. One of the toughest challenges can be rejecting the version of oneself that believes in constant availability. It's all about saying no to the nagging voice that insists worth is tied to endless giving. That's the starting point for massive transformation, where guilt might fade slowly, but it begins to peel away. The emotional reflex weakens too, and clarity dawns. Refusing someone doesn't equal wounding them. Setting boundaries doesn't stir up conflict. It protects energy, creating a space that feels empowering rather than selfish. With each no, a person starts to discern the difference between draining and genuine commitments. Emotional space opens up, allowing them to breathe easier in conversations and make more grounded decisions. Over time, saying no evolves into a powerful tool for reshaping life with intention. It becomes about ensuring that their precious time and energy is devoted to what truly matters, affirming their presence as valuable. And here's the twist. When a person starts saying no, the world doesn't implode. It expands around them. As they cultivate clarity, they also cultivate joy. They move from survival mode to thriving, attracting relationships with those who respect boundaries instead of exploiting their lack. Interactions become a dance of authenticity, without the need for apologies or the urge to shrink into spaces that don't welcome them. This gradual shift leads to an extraordinary realization, the liberation found in simply existing without obligations. Breathing freely, showing up out of genuine desire rather than obligation, becomes the new norm. It's a soft yet profound freedom that alters everything. Eventually, they reach a point where saying no feels second nature, a true expression of self-alignment rather than rebellion against others. In this newfound realm, people rediscover a part of themselves long lost, their preferences, their voices, their very essence. A joy from childhood surfaces when nothing felt more crucial than being oneself. This journey back to the core of who they are becomes the epitome of transformation, a beautiful reclamation of self after years of yielding to every yes that didn't resonate. And that